Hello and welcome to this sort of different format from the TCS. I'm Ben from the Tech Ed committee, kind of. I'm actually the president of the CSO club, which is the sort of like overhead, I guess, company you could say of Tech Ed. And so today I have the president of NACRA, Pranoy. So he's the president, and while he does a lot of other stuff, we're going to start with the club NACRA. So, Pranoy, what does NACRA stand for?
Hey, glad to be here. Uh, Basically, NACRA stands for the Nihon Arts and Culture Research Association, and Nihon is just Japanese for Japan. Um, and while it's a pretty fancy name, we're just the anime club, really.
Okay, so you say an anime club. Is this an official club that TAMS endorses? Like, to what extent does TAMS support this club?
Yeah, so it is an official club. It's listed on the website. We've registered with TAMS itself, but it's not an advised club. So we don't have an advisor, and we sort of do pretty informal things, and we don't get funding, but we're still an official club.
Okay. And so you're like on the website and stuff, right?
Yeah, there's like a little paragraph for us, and um, we've got Facebook, and Ben Warren is now part of it, so there's that.
Yeah, so you gotta make sure you're saying,
Yeah.
pretty safe things. But anyways, so why should people like care to join the anime club, as you put it?
Yeah, so NACRA is this, and I say it's the anime club, but actually we sort of, we talk about anime and also manga and J-pop, K-pop, various other subcultures that are sort of niche in some ways, and we're just this community where you can talk about whatever, and typically talk about things like that. You can talk about games like Osu or Genshin Impact, etc. So we do we basically have watch parties occasionally and fun GAs, and it's just a sort of nice community thing. Actually, tomorrow we're planning on hosting a watch party on just movies like Your Name or 5 centimeters per second. So yeah.
So I wouldn't say that K-pop is necessarily a small thing to talk about. It's a pretty big category.
Okay, it's not, maybe
Um,
it's not as niche, especially at Thames. But yeah.
yeah. Um, so I guess a question that follows up with that, you mentioned how people talk about anime, manga, just a variety of topics. So does everyone in the club watch anime?
Not everyone watches anime. In fact, even I don't watch as much anime, to be honest. I read a lot of manga, so it's not like you have to watch anime. But there are some people who don't know very much about anime and are just there to sort of hang out with people, which I think is nice as well, given our circumstances.
Yeah, of course. And so something interesting to point out is that anime fans generally have a reputation to be maybe not toxic necessarily, but definitely socially awkward around other people. So do you find, as the president, do you feel like this club is particularly unwelcoming to new people, especially people who just don't watch anime? Maybe they watch like one or two shows, are familiar with a few characters. What's the sort of atmosphere, especially in like the Discord server in this online format where anonymity is pretty big?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I do agree. Oftentimes, like online communities for anime will be very either toxic or elitist, and we sort of try and avoid that. And basically, anyone can sort of talk about what they like. So if someone mentions how much they like Naruto, no one's gonna like come down on them for watching too mainstream shows or anything. We're just this welcoming community, and we hope that we basically make sure that no one uh, is sort of made fun of because of what they like.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty chill and relaxed community, especially since I've actually participated in some of these events, and definitely when it was in person, it was a lot more interesting. So anecdotally, there was actually an event where we could watch Weathering with You on the live opening in theaters. It was something like 8 p.m. on a weekend where we just reserved a ticket in advance, a seat, and we all just drove down to the nearest movie theater and watched it. It was a pretty great time, especially on the bus ride there and back where we were just playing music in general and just talking with each other. Um, but now is the section that I'm actually personally really excited for. And it's nothing to do with anime. It's actually related to so recently we're recording this November 12th. 2020, and so this would have been 3 days, I believe. Yeah, 2 days after the Apple event where they released their M1 chip. And so, Pranoy, what are your initial thoughts on this new sort of like, not even CPU? I guess you can explain your thoughts on it.
Yeah, yeah. So the M1 chip, it's this uh, system on a chip, I guess, where they sort of combine all these different um, multiple things. What used to be multiple chips into one chip now. So like the GPU, different types of CPUs, they have this like neural engine thing that they talk about all the time, and um, I think it's interesting because um, I don't know. I think there's trade-offs. I think that for one, for the laptop, I think it makes sense. Like it's definitely going to. It looks like for one, the performance increases and the efficiency increases that they're sort of talking about sound really attractive. But also, uh, I don't like the downside of basically not being able to have RAM that you can change out and all that. So yeah, I think there's downsides as well.
Yeah, especially for third-party repair stores. This is basically the biggest shift Apple has done ever since the sort of legal lawsuits have been sort of slowly trickling in. But I think what's really interesting is that you specifically talk about laptops and how it's a good step for laptops. And I think the trend in the industry, especially with premium laptops, is to go thinner, lighter, yet maintain the same, if not better, CPU, GPU performance and battery life. And so the compromises that had to be made in 2016 and especially today is start soldering on components. And so even in most modern high-end laptops like the Dell XPS or your Razer Book Stealth or whatever, you end up having soldered RAM. Obviously, your CPU isn't, you can't swap that out unless you have like an Alienware, but that's a pretty niche product. And so yeah, laptops are slowly approaching, more of the phone territory where maybe your storage is, interchangeable, but that's basically it. And I think what is incredibly interesting is the fact that RAM is integrated into this chip. Um,
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting because like it makes sense in some regards in that like it will be faster. Like it'll basically just having that integrated in the chip. Um, I mean, it should uh, just make everything easier for them, I guess. But
and you also have the small performance increases from, let's say, better cooling, because now you can actively cool your RAM chip. And then you will also have increased speeds, decreased latency, and increased sort of retrieval times, if that makes sense, since the physical distance is also a lot shorter.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's all sort of there sharing that RAM, which is interesting.
Yeah, and so I actually had two topics specifically on the M1 chip, which I found incredibly interesting. The first one, I'm just gonna say it out there. So the GPU cores. For those who don't know, the M1 chip has four high-speed CPU cores, four low-speed CPU cores, and that's what most mobile devices on your Android phones have. Snapdragon, Qualcomm. That's sort of like the way it's set, anyways. But what's interesting is that the GPU is baked onto the SoC, so it's an 8-core GPU, and it's pretty. It should be a lot better than Intel's current integrated graphics. But what I think is incredibly interesting is that the RAM will be shared, and this isn't new for integrated graphics. But what's interesting is that Apple caters the sort of graphics performance towards things like video games and especially video editing, which is RAM intensive, both GPUs and just computer wise. So I'm incredibly interested to see if 8 gigabytes is enough, because frankly, I don't think it is for the sort of applications Apple is promising, especially on high-end displays.
Yeah, yeah, they showed like what was it? I think like editing two 4K streams or whatever. I don't know about 8 gigs of RAM for something like that, you know? Um,
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out is that um, while it may seem crazy for people who aren't really tuned into Apple, what makes Apple incredibly amazing is the level of efficiency they managed to pull out of set hardware. And you wouldn't think that a phone 5 years old with like 2 gigabytes of 1 gigabyte of RAM even would be able to run, cutting edge operating systems. But Apple manages to pull it off, and even in their laptops, this is true. You have incredibly low spec hardware, pulling off tasks most Windows and even Linux users sometimes find hard to believe. And it's just because Apple is able to have such an integrated and efficient. I guess full stack would be the best way to put it, especially since now they control basically everything from the hardware to the software.
Yeah, they have this incredible like vertical integration, I guess, this vertical stack that they sort of own every stage in the process, which does lead to them having a much less uh, Frankenstein ecosystem, unlike say Windows or Linux. Um, but also, I feel like there's just so many downsides in terms of just like the openness of that uh, ecosystem in general. Um, like they're
Yeah,
talking about all these changes, and I mean, it definitely seems like when they're talking about security and privacy, they're sort of moving to control the ecosystem even more.
yeah, and what is incredibly frustrating as somebody who loves to play video games is that how they have Thunderbolt 3 ports? Um, it's an Intel standard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so while on paper it's like totally fine, you can get adapters. What's not fine is that it actually doesn't support external graphics. And so if you hook up, even Apple's, I believe, Blackmagic eGPU, it will not work on these laptops, which I think is incredibly strange. Um, I'm not entirely sure why. If I had to guess, this is probably just a bandwidth issue. Because, actually, fun fact, this M1 chip is, I believe, to be ripped from the iPad Pro 2020, just a few tweaks here and there. But, overall, it is essentially the same chip.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I believe this chip was not actually designed with 10 gigabit Ethernet, which is no longer an option. We'll get to that, or
Mm.
Thunderbolt 3, which has incredibly high speeds, especially for graphics. And while this could be an Apple thing, I suspect this is more of a limitation on the M1 chip itself.
Yeah, also like I mean the MacBook Air and the Pro, don't they only have two USB ports? Though what was it? Like the Thunderbolt
Oh,
C
we're going to
ports?
get
That's
we're going to
so
get to
like
that.
what?
Okay. Let me quickly get past. What are your thoughts on the? I call them machine learning cores. Um, so what are your thoughts on those?
Well, it's definitely interesting that it's showing up in the I guess like for end users. Like I think it's really showing how much like machine learning is going on in just everyday applications nowadays. Like I mean, just for example, they're talking about their webcam, which is only 720p, which is unfortunate. But uh, what was it? They talk about using machine learning to make the signal processing for that even better. And so I think it's interesting because they definitely have. I mean, I don't know. Like, I just wonder how useful it's going to be because I think it will be really useful actually.
Yeah, and I think the two biggest applications I can see, I mean they're both heavy workload related, but the first case would be sort of, photo editing, video editing. I suspect that these cores could be used in combination with Apple's already existing sort of predictive software and background processing to sort of speed up workloads. But what I'm really interested in as programmers is I don't know if you watched the specific live stream. I did. I was just like walking around. They actually specifically mentioned TensorFlow in work applications for these ML cores,
Hmm.
which I thought was really cool. And then they mentioned some like weird thing I didn't know. I wasn't listening. I just heard TensorFlow and I was like, hold up, this could be pretty interesting for hobbyists, neural network programmers, right?
Yeah,
Developers.
I see. They mentioned that it's like a 9x improvement or whatever in terms of
I
machine
mean,
learning
when you have a
cores.
specific chip, it's not hard to achieve that kind of
Yeah,
upgrade.
but what I mean is like, I so I I definitely can see this as being a big improvement for like user end stuff. That's like all it needs to do is run a neural model, but actually training anything that is not Linet 5, um,
Yeah.
is still going to not be something you want to do on a MacBook, I don't think. You know?
Yeah, especially since once again we'll get to this later, but there's only two yeah, there's quite a lot of limitations with this with the chassis Apple chose.
I
So
definitely
yeah,
I do like that these are things that are showing up in laptops at least because
yeah,
like there's I mean I remember with like Nvidia's announcements they talked about a lot of the machine learning stuff that they're sort of giving to the user, which I like.
yeah, and I think what's incredibly exciting is the availability of these devices. Nvidia, you have the memes about the 3080, 3090 selling out instantly, but with Apple, you're not gonna have a supply chain issue. Everyone's gonna at least try to get a MacBook because that's just Apple's sort of that's just sort of how they roll, I guess. And with the ubiquity of these like ML cores, I hope that other developers will take, well, not developers, other companies like AMD would take notice and perhaps make a specialized, ML, I guess, processor, which would be interesting to see, especially if for like hobbyist or maybe prosumer grade, people.
Yeah, doesn't Google have these like tensor cores or what they call like the TPUs, the tensor processing units that are
Yeah, I believe so.
and
But I think what the thing is that not everyone will have access to a Google server or a university server, which I think is what makes this really exciting.
yeah, yeah.
Because some people, you don't really have a choice. But this actually segues pretty nicely into my next topic, which is sort of the form factor. These laptops with the M1 chip, they're not going to be great, as you mentioned, processing, heavy workloads. Let's say you're running through the ImageNet database using VGG19, for example, or even ImageNet. Oh, lordy. If you're trying to train ImageNet on, let's say, like your coffee cups, oh boy, you better have some ice cubes because the MacBook Air has no fans at all. And this is great for people, who basically just browse the web, which is the sort of demographic, the Air's targeting. But even for their pro device, they just slap a fan in there and they're like, oh, now it's so much better. But, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I'm doubtful.
Yeah, see, like, what is the difference between the Air and the Pro outside of just like a fan? And I
Oh
mean,
boy.
actually, hmm,
Yeah, so I dug into it. I'm like, bro, there's no way, the only difference is like a touch bar and a fan and like a slight chassis difference. But like, surprise surprise, you paid $300 for like 2 extra hours of battery life and a touchscreen bar and like more weight.
hmm,
But, it's so strange because it's sort of like Apple doesn't know what to do. Like they don't feel comfortable just chopping off just an entire product, I guess. So my guess is that this is some conspiracy theory level speculation, but they'll probably phase out the 13-inch MacBook Pro because keep in mind they used to have a 13-inch MacBook Pro with no touch bar. Doesn't exist anymore. We haven't heard anything about it. So I expect them to phase out this MacBook Pro 13-inch because yeah, spec-wise it's exactly the same as the Air. The only difference is a fan, but that doesn't make it a pro device. The ports are the same, Both can't even. You don't have an SD card slot, Like come on, man. I believe the XPS even has a micro SD card. It's no eGPU. Like
Pro laptop with 2 USB ports. Oh
yeah,
my.
like yeah, boohoo, it's Thunderbolt 3. Wow, we're so cool. But man, like a pro user, like I definitely am using more than 3 USB ports right now. I'm not even a pro.
Same, exactly. I
Yeah.
don't know.
So if the MacBook Pro 13-inch didn't exist at all, I would think I wouldn't really have any. I'll just be like, yeah, that's fine for a regular like just a random college student who's majoring in like biology. I don't think they would care at all. They might like complain a little bit, but Apple's trackpad, they're so on point, literally and metaphorically, that I don't think they would want to use an external mouse. And they fixed the keyboard. That's another thing I'm excited about. They're using the less trashy OG MacBook Air 2014 layout, which everybody loved. Then they set up the butterfly. The keyboards literally broke from dust. The real world use case. This is like even worse than the Galaxy Fold level of like, come on, man. And so then like, they spent 4 years to say, yeah, we're sorry. This butterfly mechanism did kind of stink. And they reverted it, and now I'm pretty happy overall. If I didn't have a pretty good laptop already, I'd be pretty tempted, not gonna lie.
Hmm. That's interesting. What do you think about the touch bar, by the way? I mean,
It's a really stupid gimmick. That's the upshot, and it's because there's no consistency. Maybe with Apple software, there might be some consistency, emojis here and there, but it's the sort of thing where you ask yourself, will I use this or will this be a neat gimmick? And because it's it's in place of your function row, and I don't use that at all. Like normally, I would not see myself using it. There's some cool things, but it's like, man, it's more like a party trick than anything else.
yeah, it's like so what you can control your volume with it. Does it matter?
Yeah.
Like,
The only thing I was thinking about this actually. I was like, what could you do to make the touch bar really cool? And the answer is obviously custom macros. If you have a key that's like, open up Safari and then text my friend, haha, I have a MacBook and you don't. Like, man, having codable macros, like shortcuts, but for the MacBook, that would be insane.
that would definitely be at least more useful than it is now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's incredibly interesting is that Apple actually has software that allows you to convert your iOS and iPad apps into, compatible MacBook apps.
Was that Rosetta too, or is that something different?
I think it's just native.
It's just
Like
they can just run iOS stuff
it
now.
might be Rosetta. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I honestly don't know which software is which.
Oh no,
But
I think Rosetta is the running the Intel stuff on
Intel.
ARM, I believe. Yeah,
Okay.
never mind. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because the one I was thinking of that kind of looks like the slime god from Calamity Terraria mod is that's actually for developers. That lets you convert the binary, which I also think is really interesting. Like
Mm-hmm.
converting binary. That sounds complicated, but I'm sure Apple has a method. It's still interesting though, right? Because you're swapping from x86 to ARM architecture.
Yeah, it's just I guess a transpiler. That makes sense.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting is that do you think developers could use this to develop just generic ARM, like as in an ARM, let's say an ARM .exe file, well not .exe, but you know what I mean, an ARM application that would run on let's say a Raspberry Pi, which uses ARM as well.
I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like I would doubt that, but I
Okay.
mean, I don't know. It just given Apple as a company, but
Yeah.
I don't actually know anything about Rosetta 2 in general, so I wouldn't know.
But what's interesting, what I was really thinking about is like how would application prices work like on the App Store, Because now, because beforehand, the Mac Store and App Store were two separate things for obvious reasons. Your desktop application would have more features, would be more polished, and would be optimized for that sort of workload. But now that you can use like both the iOS and the Mac version, like I wonder what developers think. For example, To Do, which is my favorite task manager, follows the getting things done sort of workflow. It's it was free when I got it. Turned to like $5, $10. It's still pretty cheap for the level of complexity you get. But on Mac, it's $50, like 50, 5 times, 10 times more, like infinity times more than my initial purchase of it. But now, like, I can just use my iOS version of To Do for free. Like, I don't know what they're like. How does pricing work, especially for video games, right? Let's say BTD 6. It's a great game on iOS. It's $5. On Steam, it's also $5, which in itself isn't an issue. But I wonder about like other applications.
Hmm.
Like what about mobile games?
Among
Let's say
Us.
mobile esports. Yeah, like Among Us, kind of. But a theoretical scenario would be what if you're obviously you could save money, but that's like a whatever. But what about like competitive integrity? What if mobile esports becomes a thing and you're just like on your computer? I That brings up a lot of interesting edge cases. Um, but I think that's a pretty niche question.
Yeah, it's like
uh,
but yeah, that is interesting. I mean, because see, like the thing is with like Among Us, it's free on iOS, but it's paid on desktop, and
yeah,
so it is one of those things to where like, well, why don't you just do that? I guess.
and something else that I think's like super weird is the sort of thing that's like why okay, so if we can convert iOS and iPad apps to Mac, why can't we convert Mac applications to iOS, iPad OS? Because it's clear that it's not too hard. They're both on the same, essentially the same architectures at this point.
Hmm.
So I just think that's an interesting question because that would allow you to run Mac OS apps on your iPad. Is the biggest case I'm thinking of. Um,
At what point does iPad OS and Mac become the same thing? Because
I think once you have this cross like the dual exchange, Colombian exchange sort of thing, where you have where you have iPad apps and Mac apps accessible on both devices, that's when the full transfer, you know, exists. There's no real difference. It's more of a use case difference, and that's like what I was thinking about because I was like, who would buy um the Mac Mini or the MacBook Air. Like why would you get one or the other? And like the sort of like for a casual user, right, who would just browse the internet, type some essays, do some homework, talk with friends, video chat. Like what advantages and disadvantages would you have for each? And the only one I could think of was like, you don't have touchscreen, I guess. But then I remember the iPad existed with the Apple Pencil. And I'm like, the iPad Air plus the Apple Pencil and a Folio is like, that's like $800, which isn't cheap. But if you're considering getting a MacBook Air, that might not be a bad option, especially if you like writing your notes. Like me and I guess I'm guessing you as well. I feel like you're that kind of guy.
I do, although I normally do it on a notebook. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I feel like the iPad is a really interesting. Apple's got a really interesting lineup in general, because now that they swapped fully over to ARM. And so I want to talk about the last topic, which is the Mac Mini. Actually, right before that, I'm gonna predict something. The next I'm gonna call it M1.5. They're like genuinely, this is gonna like slap Intel and just like make them, become alcoholic from the level of depression they'll have, right? Yeah, TSMC, Apple, AMD, they're just gonna mega bully Intel, right?
Yeah.
Um, M1.5 is gonna have purely CPU and ML cores, and I'm just gonna throw a number out there. I expect, like a 12 core, 16 core CPU, 8 high power, yeah, 8 high power, 8 low power, and probably just the same 16 ML cores. And then a discrete GPU, because that's the M1's biggest problem. You can't hook up a discrete GPU to it, mainly because I'm just guessing bandwidth. But with the discrete GPU, all of a sudden this processor is incredibly scary. But yeah, 10 gig Ethernet. It's probably just sorry, Linus Tech Tips, but that's definitely a bandwidth issue. Would be my guess.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that as well.
But what are your thoughts on the Mac Mini?
Um, See, I guess I don't know, to be honest. Just the Mac Mini, it seems like, I mean, for one, it's this small PC, right? Um,
Yeah,
I don't really see the appeal of it, I guess. Like, what's the point? I mean, I guess it's cheaper than the MacBook Air, but uh,
but you don't have a screen, right?
exactly, it's just
Or a
harder to
keyboard.
carry around. And people who are going to be sitting down and doing their work, like with a dedicated machine, if you're going to be doing that, you may as well have um, like a higher priced, I don't know, Mac Pro or something, right? Um,
Yeah.
but honestly, it's worth it to pay the extra $300 to have something that's portable, I think.
And on a side note, students get $100 discount on the laptops, but not the desktop, which is a little bit sad. But then this MacBook Air, right now it's $1,000, which is like, it's fine. But when it drops down to 900, all of a sudden, like, that's starting to get to the point where you're like, man, is there any competitor in this market? Like maybe XPS, but you're getting a base config, which isn't optimal. And then like, what other laptops are there? I guess you have like your Acers, your Asuses, yeah, maybe even your Huawei's if you're really into that, or like your Xiaomi's if you can get them. Like man, you start to really like realize this could become, especially with like an AirPod deal, which they've done before.
Hmm.
You get AirPods with your in like the ecosystem, like all of it combined. It suddenly becomes like, man, that's actually like now a competitive option again. And it was a competitive option, but now it's just a lot better from a technical standpoint as well. It's not just a brand thing.
Hmm. No, I
But
agree. It's the performance is definitely really nice, I think.
yeah,
At
and
least
so
from going from what they've shown. Although they have some weird slides. Do you see that slide where it was like,
God,
what was it? It's
there's a few where I audibly laughed out loud. Okay, I just want to make a side note. I watched the video game portion. I'm like, oh, it can game, right? And I noticed it wasn't at 60 FPS. I think it was closer to 30 or 25, but it
oh,
kind of hurt me inside. I'm like, there's no way. Like, what?
they had a slide that was like this many times better than the leading Windows laptop or
Oh,
whatever.
dude, I
Just
think
like
I laughed out loud when I got to that part. Jeez, that was funny.
it's just like the leading Windows laptop with this, which like is that like a 4 GB
Yeah.
Walmart one? I don't know, honestly.
Um, yeah, and then when they said that with when they said it for the desktop, I like literally laughed out loud. It was so funny because the problem with comparing general products like consumer grade products to Apple stuff is that you don't have that ecosystem, right? Um, you don't have that sort of um, and you also have that upgradability, which is pretty nice. And Apple does a bunch of small things which a general user might not care about as much. I mean, sure, it's great if you can have it, but I don't know. Especially with this Mac Mini. What's interesting, I was like, oh, what are the PC alternatives? So I looked up at a Dell desktop and was like, wow, this actually looks like a good deal. And then I looked at the Intel NUCs. Are you aware of Intel's like NUC lineup?
No, I am not.
Okay. So just imagine a Mac Mini, but it runs Windows. And I actually don't know the exact dimensions, but Yeah, that's basically it. It's a Mac Mini form factor that can run Windows,
Hmm.
and they have low end, high end. So I looked at an equivalent pricing. So you get 4 times the RAM, equivalent storage. Of course, speeds and whatnot would differ, but the gist of it is that this actually isn't like an incredibly great deal if you want a small form factor desktop. And the Nux eGPU, their Thunderbolt 3 port actually works. Gee, um, you know, but my opinion is that the Mac Mini, they lowered the price, and so I watched Linus Tech Tip. We're not sponsored. I wish we were, but his
Squarespace.
impression, yeah, his impression was that the Mac Mini is kind of like it's like a bad product, and he's like Apple knows this. That's why they lowered the price. Kind of disagree, just because I feel like Apple knows at this point that the Mac Mini probably just didn't sell very well because as you said, people who need a desktop, they just get a higher end desktop or maybe one with a screen, or if they need a screen, portability, and a trackpad, they just get the MacBook Air.
Yeah,
And so,
I feel like there's a very small minority of people that a Mac Mini would be useful for. I mean,
but here's my guess as to why they lowered the price. They're trying to target a very specific audience, and in general, I think this is what they're trying to do. Have you noticed? I don't know if this is in all the conferences. I don't watch very many. This is the only one I watch because of M1. But they seem to be targeting programmers a lot. Like people, the sort of like things programmers care about. Do you feel that?
well, I mean, I guess it is a tech conference. So yeah, I definitely say so.
Yeah.
Like they always bring up various things that programmers like, I guess.
There
Um,
is this thing that's like it compiles code X times faster, but I'm just like, who cares? That's not really that big of an issue unless you're like Linus Torvald, compiling kernels over here. But you're if you're like Linus Torvald, you're just like running Linux,
See,
you don't care.
the thing is, and even compiling the Linux kernel, it takes uh honestly like I don't know 10-30 minutes on like a really bad ThinkPad. So like it's not like the longest thing in the world. It's not a browser, so but
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh.
that's harsh. But yeah, like in my opinion, like I feel like the Mac Mini and the Mac Mini, like really just because I've heard of this before. People ask why does the Mac Mini exist, and the argument I've read was, oh, it's the cheapest way to actually develop for Apple products,
Oh,
Apple software, you
okay.
know.
That's actually very yeah, you could
Yeah,
have like a farm of
because
these and have
no,
it.
because Apple, for some reason, doesn't allow you to code in Swift unless, well, you can code in Swift, but it doesn't allow you to develop apps unless you have a working, like iTunes account, and then like it's so gated.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just them like asserting authority over their
yeah,
ecosystem and it's
and here's another reason why I think it's pretty interesting. Like, who else are targeting? School systems, businesses, school administration, and that kind of sounds like a joke on the surface, right?
hmm.
But here's the thing: Apple, because of Apple's incredible sort of like, um, I guess, like you only need to worry about one company, and that's Apple, and they can give you the support and all that, and their products are really like well engineered, and no doubt in my mind, they will support these products for years to come, and they may actually get better because a lot of the performance improvements were from software, and this software is incredibly beta, even though they release it on the final product. First gen products always beta products in my mind, right?
Hmm.
Just look at the Samsung Fold, and so these Mac Minis, because they're $100 cheaper, that pushes them more into like I could see them in like a computer science class, 10 years from now, and there's just a bunch of they're really small as well, smaller than many small form factor desktops. Of course, maybe not as small as a NUC, but they're still very small. And so I could see a bunch of these hooked up via HDMI to a $100 monitor. It could just be Dell, it could be anything. But you have like just like as a IT person, you don't have to worry about some kid installing a virus or like running anything weird. They can't play any games on it because it's an ARM, right? Like, and because it's like Apple, you can lock down stuff probably even further using like parental controls and whatnot. Of course, you won't have the same flexibility as you would on Windows, but Apple's gotten better for like network hard drives and like network drives through. I don't know if anyone's done it through Samba, but you can definitely still access network drives. It's a lot more. Yeah, I mean, it's just like I guess the what I'm trying to say is that the cost of transferring over isn't as bad as most people would probably think, um,
Mm.
especially with the sort of the growing momentum of good Mac apps, especially since like big companies have versions for both operating systems and sometimes even Linux. Hashtag Valve, I guess, right? Yeah, like I could see like in 2, 3, like 5 years, you will have an office just full of Mac Minis because they're not honestly not that much more expensive than a desktop they would just buy. Of course, um you would have some complaints, but same with like Google's like 940 chess, 900 IQ, a Chromebook sort of deal, where every student's gonna learn Chromebooks. Some may grow up to become a longtime user. I feel like Apple's trying to do something like that.
No, I can definitely see that. In fact, I mean, I've been to colleges where they sort of just have Mac labs, and there's not really many Windows computers on campus, and so I don't know. Actually, the college in question was Austin College, but um, I don't know. It sort of I think it is interesting, and also I think it is something that like maybe you'd buy just to compile a certain Swift program on and have it, I suppose, um, to sort of just test your iOS code as well. So like, say you're using React Native to create an app, and so you can obviously test it on Android and all that pretty easily, and you can test it on your laptop. But to make sure that it works on iOS, you might just buy something small like this.
Yeah, and sorry, and like I was still thinking about it because what's interesting is that AMD is trying to eat into Intel's sort of like business market with like pre-built devices using AMD, and we see this in AMD 4000 processors on laptops, and we're starting to see it in desktops as well. And what's interesting in terms of like a market perspective is that Apple's sort of like splash around when AMD is also making ginormous waves with their GPUs and CPUs is that I wonder if people just go, you know what, I'm just gonna get like a Mac OS, Mac get a Mac OS, get a Mac Mini instead of like AMD or Intel, just because you are guaranteed. Businesses love to keep on to their devices for like years on end,
Mm.
keep onto that Apple device, and like businesses they don't really like. I expect they don't like the way Windows handles their updates, and they're sure as hell not going to make their users learn Linux. So I think macOS is not a terrible option, actually, for some businesses who just want to use their devices for 5 years for maximum device support. And for $700, that might be worth it, especially if you can take advantage of some of Apple's hardware and software.
I can definitely see that. Yeah. Um, I've always heard of companies that sort of use ThinkPads and then every couple of years throw them out, like just
Yeah,
en masse, and it's crazy. So I mean, I guess something like that would be much better.
and something I feel like what's also interesting is that you mentioned video render farms, which is a little bit strange considering the graphics processing power is not great. But if you are using Apple software, what's interesting, I don't know if you noticed, but for like iMovie and even Final Cut, what makes editing on 4K possible, you could probably edit in maybe not 4K on the old laptops, but you could definitely edit 1080p. Is what Apple does is they actually do some rendering and sort of like the processing in the background as you're trying to edit new parts of the clip. Apple like silently renders and processes the previous parts you worked on.
Mm.
And so this isn't the case for Premiere. What Premiere does is you do all the changes and then you click render and then Adobe goes through it all at once, which on principle sounds pretty good. Sounds like something I would do even. You would just wait for until you get a huge pile and then you just burn through all of it in a flash. Well, sometimes not quite flash, but what Apple does, they kind of multitask and ends up working incredibly well. You don't even have to click a render button most of the time, at least for iMovie. And so I believe like their brags about 4K and 8K editing, that's like largely actually in part of their incredible efficiency with their software, which they specialize in making terrible hardware work with pretty modern software, which I think's cool. But I just kind of wish their GPU was better.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's. I mean, it's at least better than integrated, I guess. But whatever.
there's one last thing I want to point out, and it's the idea of dual booting. So Apple's made it pretty painless to actually dual boot into Windows. I don't know how the Windows licensing works, but I just assume it does. But what's interesting now is because it's on ARM architecture. I believe there was a Windows build for ARM, but it is not. It is definitely not standard. But what I'm really curious about is Linux, and my guess is there is no dual booting at all, um, simply because of the architecture. It's in ARM, and most of Intel's most of Microsoft's sort of applications just gonna explode on ARM. And for Linux, you have your Raspbian, right?
Hmm.
But the thing is that you have to you have to be able to change the BIOS to allow for dual booting, to allow for like your grub to actually bootload multiple operating systems. And I expect just Apple won't allow that for security reasons, of
This is,
course.
yeah, clearly. I see. You could totally run. There's tons of flavors of Linux that run on ARM, and you can honestly compile your own version if you wanted. But the biggest issue is going to be Apple's, I guess, privacy concerns and basic, I guess, all these controls over their BIOS and all that.
Actually, and another thing I just realized. So, the thing. Okay, how do I phrase it? The MacBook Air is going to be really. It's gonna have an incredibly long lifespan, if that makes sense. As in, like, you're not gonna need to really worry about cleaning it or making sure it's fine. Like, you can just use that thing for probably, like, I would honestly bet 10 years you could keep using this device with the battery life, which is incredible. And which is why I think it's probably one of the best laptops for this price point. You know, even though the claims about battery life are clearly through ideal conditions, I still think once you get to 12 plus, like, dude, you're totally set. And if you like do some battery draining tasks like gaming, you won't have to worry at all. You got that peace of mind, which I think is pretty nice, especially for students with really weird schedules, or like weird, I guess, workflows would be the best way to put it, with their traveling and whatnot.
Hmm.
But yeah, because it's fanless, like all of a sudden I just realized, I'm like, wait, you don't have to really worry about thermals because presumably the back of the chassis is your thermal solution. And
Hmm.
so since no dust can really clog up a fan to reduce efficiency, the only efficiency is, I guess, how much surface area your laptop has. So I guess if you scuff it, drop it on the floor, you might actually increase the the thermal efficiency, increase cooling by intentionally scuffing it.
Hmm.
Um, which is an interesting thought.
Yeah, what if you add like, I don't know, like ripples to it? Like, well then.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you just intentionally add, like, you do like a Louis Vuitton approach and you somehow stitch a bunch of cool designs across it. Oh my gosh. Dude, you know what? Something else I want to see, because there's so few ports, you could honestly try to water cool just the back of the chassis. Just, Linus Tech Tips actually did a video where they did it with like a 2015 MacBook Pro, but less ports now, so it should definitely be possible.
That's so big brain.
Yeah, it's honestly, but it's so silly. Like, honestly, if I were to describe the MacBook Air in like 10 seconds, it would just be the iPad Pro plus a keyboard in macOS. Like, that's basically it. Um, oh, and the screen's worse, but jeez, can't wait for their 120 hertz displays on the laptops. Make it happen. Now you can't even argue about how bad Intel's iGPU is. You can make it work because your own GPU is so good. Apparently, I want to see that, man.
Hmm.
Because yeah, honestly, I think if they add a 120 hertz screen to their laptops, like, my mind would literally explode. Like, and honestly, I wish, like, the MacBook Pro 15 inch, like, my theory, what I want to happen is they have a really good M1.5 chip that focuses purely on CPU power, have a discrete GPU with a 120 hertz display. Like, that's all you need. And then it's like, oh man, that's crazy. The battery life won't even be eaten that much since Apple has variable refresh rate software plus extra battery life from efficiency gains.
Hmm.
So, like, man, and even if it's like $1,300, like, man, all of a sudden it's got something that no other premium ultrabook has, which is that high refresh rate display, which is like the sort of quality of life change which a lot of people would appreciate. and they can brag about, and I guess the other manufacturers just have to ask themselves, is it worth just like cutting your battery life in half to compete with Apple? Like probably not. So that's just sort of like my dream, my dream for the 15-inch. Also probably just a better aspect ratio. 16:10 is kind of lame. Go 3:2, Apple, do it, make it happen. But yeah, I think that's it for all my thoughts, complaints, and stuff. But yeah, once again, Pranoy, thanks for showing up. We talked about NACRA, complained about Apple for a bit, and yeah, it's a real pleasure just talking with you.
No, absolutely. Same to you as well.
Yeah, and so I guess any last thoughts, Pranoy? Any last comments?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, once again, thanks guys. This is a Tech Ed interview. I guess the best way to put it. And yeah, have a great day.